Today is Thimerosal, Let the Science Speak, with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Dr. Robert Hendren. Hello and welcome to today's program of the Commonwealth Club of California. My name is Kevin O'Malley. I'm the chairman of the Business and Leadership Forum here at the club and your host for today. Our program today is Thimerosal, Let the Science Speak, with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Our moderator today is Dr. Robert Hendren, Vice Chair of the Department of Psychiatry and Director of Autism and Neurodevelopment Program at UCSF Benioff Hospital at UCSF, University of California in San Francisco. With that, I would like to turn our program over to our moderator, Dr. Hendren, and then we will have Mr. Kennedy come up and speak, stand up and speak, and then we'll turn it over to audience questions. Please use the question cards. Thank you.
Thanks. We're have a great opportunity today to, I think, address some really important questions and to do some thinking about some problems that are of concern. Concern about vaccines and bolstering immunity, concerns about what appears to be a rising incidence of autism and other neurodevelopmental disorders, and a number of ideas and thoughts that link the two of those. So we're here today to talk about vaccines, but more about Thimerosal with the leading expert in that whole field, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is a New York Times best-selling author, Times Magazine 2010 Hero of the Planet, a clinical professor of environmental law and senior attorney at the National Resources Defense Council. So I'm looking forward to hearing you after reading your book and then having us have a chance to talk and to take your questions. So join me in welcoming Mr. Kennedy.
I want to thank all of you who came today on short notice to listen to some of the things that we're going to talk about. So I particularly want to thank the Commonwealth Club because this is a debate that is freighted with controversy, it's radioactive, and you will not see this debate in any kind of comprehensive form in any newspaper in this country, and you will not see it on any television station, and some of the local TV stations will cover it peripherally, but you will not see any comprehensive debate about this issue anywhere in the mainstream media, and even in the so-called alternate media, places like Slate and Salon and the Huffington Post and Mother Jones will not cover this issue. And there's a tremendous amount of science on this issue, and I think we're going to talk about that a little later. We have a book here, if I can hold this up. This is a book that I and a group of about a dozen leading scientific researchers in this country put together, where we combed the scientific literature for 2.5 years, and with the intention of finding every major peer-reviewed published article ever published about the safety of Thimerosal and vaccines. And we found, in the end, at a time when the CDC was saying that there is no published scientific literature that says the CDC is that Thimerosal is dangerous, we found somewhere near 500 published on PubMed and other sources in the public domain, 500 peer-reviewed publications and 1,400 references. We were not cherry-picking the lead group. The leader of our research team was a man who had published pro-Thimerosal articles before joining us. We just wanted to find out the truth because CDC was saying the science doesn't exist, and at that time I knew that the science did exist. But we found hundreds of publications, and what we found is that we could not find a single published study that showed Thimerosal was safe. And I've since then met with CDC and repeatedly, and with FDA and HHS and the public health agencies, I've repeatedly challenged those agencies to show me one study, one published study, that shows that thimerosal is safe. And I've said, if you can do that, I will go on Anderson Cooper and publicly apologize for my advocacy. I will never mention thimerosal again. But that study doesn't exist, and it can't exist, because mercury, which is thimerosal is a vaccine preservative that is half mercury. Mercury is 1,000 times more neurotoxic than lead. And you couldn't do a study that showed that lead was safe because it isn't safe. And you can't do a study that shows that mercury is safe because it's much more toxic than lead. And I want to start out by saying this, that I am fiercely pro-vaccine. I had all 6 of my children vaccinated. I believe vaccinations save millions of lives. I think we ought to have federal and state policies that encourage and promote full vaccine coverage. But I also want to make sure that our vaccines are safe, because people are not going to use the vaccines if they're not safe. And we shouldn't be using unsafe vaccines anyhow. And that the vaccines are efficacious. And if you look at the studies about why some parents are vaccine hesitant, all of the studies show that people who are vaccine hesitant are people who don't trust the regulatory agency. So the key strategy for government agencies that want to, and leaders, public health leaders who want to restore full vaccine coverage, and we're not too far from that anyway. We're in the over 95%, so we're pretty good. People who want 99% vaccine coverage, the objective ought to be to restore the integrity and the credibility of the public health agencies for developing vaccines, who are adding them to the schedule, and who are testing them for safety. And right now, the principal agency involved in that process, CDC, is a very troubled agency. And that's not me who's saying this, I'm saying it, but in addition to me, there's been 4 scathing federal studies over the past few years that paint CDC's vaccine division as a cesspool of corruption. A 3-year study by a congressional committee, the Oversight Committee, in 2000, a follow-up study that study essentially said that that the conflicts of interest at CDC were debilitating the agency, the conflicts of interest with the vaccine industry. A 2004 study by Senator Tom Coburn's committee, a 2008 study by the Inspector General of HHS, and a 2014 study last year's study by the Office of Research Integrity, in which David Wright, who was the head of the Office of Research Integrity and who is an internationally esteemed public health leader, resigned because he said that the dysfunction at CDC and FDA were intractable. So there are 2 major areas in the vaccine safety division, the vaccine division of EPA, or CDC, that are problematical. And the first one is the division that places new vaccines onto the schedule. And when you think about this, you have to understand that when a vaccine gets placed onto the schedule, it has gigantic economic impacts for Big Pharma, which is a $1 trillion industry. This is one of the biggest industries in the world. And it's an interesting dynamic, because this is an industry that if they get a vaccine added to the schedule, but vaccines did not, in the old days, they weren't huge profit centers for Big Pharma. Today they are. If a vaccine company that can get a vaccine added to that schedule can make $1 billion of profit on that vaccine. So, when I was a boy, I only had to take 5 vaccines, 5 shots. Today, children take 69 shots. 16 vaccines, 69 shots. There are 271 new vaccines in the bureaucratic pipeline awaited to be added to that schedule. And Dr. Paul Offit, who is the principal, the vaccine industry insider, one of the principal promoters, the principal promoter of vaccines in this country, has said that he believes that children can take as many as 10,000 vaccines. And you have to understand that these committee hearings when the vaccine committee meets, it's not what you would picture, where a lot of scientists in lab coats and kind of geeky people are meeting and debating about public health impacts of the vaccines and the science behind the vaccines. It's a room this size that is filled with people, Wall Street analysts and businesses. And as soon as that vaccine is added to the schedule, as soon as that decision is made, they all run out of the room in the hallway with their cell phones, and you can watch the stock of that company climb spike if that vaccine is added to the schedule. So we would like to think that the committee, at least, that is making the decision to add those vaccines to the schedule are independent scientists whose only concern is the health of our children. Unfortunately, that's not true. Most of the people on that committee have some financial entanglements with the vaccine industry. And I'll give you an example. Dr. Paul Offit, who holds a chair at, I think, the University of Pennsylvania Children's Hospital, that is paid for by $1.5 million contribution from Merck, sat on the committee in 1999 that added the rotavirus vaccine to the vaccine schedule. At the time that he voted, and he did not recuse himself, he had his own rotavirus vaccine in development. And the rotavirus vaccine that he voted on was withdrawn the next year after it killed 304 children. And his vaccine was subsequently put on the schedule. So he opened the gateway for his own vaccine through that vote. Then he subsequently sold that vaccine, his royalties on that vaccine, for $182 million. And he was able to pocket something around $40 million from that transaction. So you can't put people on these committees and say, you have these huge paychecks. And he told, when he got that money, he told Newsweek magazine that for him it was like winning the lottery. That's a quote. And you can't put people on these committees and keep public faith if they're able to make these decisions and make those huge profits. Well, according to the 2008 IG report, Inspector General of HHS report, 97% of the people who sit on those committees have the same kind of conflicts that Paul Offit has. So the vaccines that we're getting, it's hard to have confidence that the vaccines that are being added to that schedule are being added because of concerns, because of the best interests of our public health. You just can't be sure of that if you know that the people who are sitting on those committees are making money from those decisions, potentially. So that's one of the issues. The other issue, the other section of CDC's vaccine division is the immunology safety division. As a division where the scientists are who make the determination about whether a particular vaccine is safe and whether it's efficacious. And for many years we've known, and what we show in this book is that the studies that are generated by that group are fraudulent studies. And I can give you an example of that. There's essentially 9 studies that the CDC has generated, and they call them the 9 studies that prove that vaccines are not connected to autism. They're all epidemiological studies, and epidemiological studies are notoriously susceptible to manipulation. They say in my business, which is environmental litigation, that statistics don't lie, but statisticians do. And you can massage that data and make it say anything you want by stratifying it, by cutting down the size of the group, by varying signals here and there. And even in epidemiology at its best can show injury, can show that a particular chemical is injurious, but they cannot show that a particular chemical is safe. And that's why the Institute of Medicine in 1999 told CDC, you have to do biological studies and clinical studies because the molecules don't lie, but statistics do. But CDC never did those studies. Instead, it did the 9 epidemiological studies that are, I'm used to in my business, which is environmental litigation, I'm used to reading science and I'm used to debating science. And I've brought hundreds of successful cases. Almost every one of them has involved some kind of scientific controversy. So I'm comfortable with it, and I'm comfortable also, I'm good at spotting junk science. The 9 studies that CDC produced is not even good junk science. Let me tell you an example. Their primary study that they always point to say that there is no connection between vaccines and autism, between Thimerosal and autism, is a study called the Madsen study that was done in Denmark. They couldn't do it to American cohorts because we got much more mercury. We were giving much more mercury to our kids. But the signals were weaker in Denmark, and they thought they could go over there and develop some kind of study that made it look safe. So they went to, Denmark banned Thimerosal in 1993 because they were concerned that it was causing autism among their children, which they'd never seen before. And so they banned it. But what the CDC study, the Madsen study shows is that after they took the Thimerosal out of the vaccines, that the autism rate continued to climb. So that was prima facie evidence that it was some other toxin in the environment that was causing this epidemic. But if you actually look at the study, what they did and what was happening on the ground is that in 1993, the year that they banned Thimerosal, they also, because autism was suddenly an issue, they also changed the definition of autism to broaden it, and they made it a mandatory reported illness on the National Disease Registry. So every nation has a disease registry, which Dr. Hendricken could tell you that if somebody walks into his office with tuberculosis or cholera or a contagious disease, he has the obligation, a legal obligation, to notify the government so that they can count that person for obvious reasons. Because you want to see what this disease is doing, measles or whatever. But autism was never on that registry in Denmark because it's not a contagious illness. So the only autistic that were counted were people who were actually inpatient in hospitals. Nobody else was counted. But in 1993, they said, we're going to count all the autistics. And so they began, and that only 6% were in the hospitals. So all of a sudden you had this giant population that was suddenly being counted, and that's what caused the spike. It was an artifact of different registration requirements and not a testimony to the increased incidence of autism. Incidentally, the data collector for that, the CDC data collector, who was the #2 author on that study, but really the primary author, was a man named Paul Thornson, who is now on the run from Interpol for having stolen the money from CDC that he was supposed to spend on research. But you won't read about that in American papers. So we've known for a long time that that division of CDC was generating these phony studies, and that's one of their best studies, by the way. The fraud is equally bad in every one of those studies, and they're all epidemiological. So in August of this year, the senior scientist at CDC, Dr. Bill Thompson, in that division, who incidentally is still at CDC and still going to work every day, he invoked federal whistleblower status, and he hired the leading whistleblower attorney in this country, Morgan Verkamp, and he gave a series of tape statements in which he said that for 10 years, the scientists in his division have been required by their bosses, and he named them, Frank Stefano, Robert Chen, Julie Gerberding, who was the director of CDC, that those individuals had required the scientists in the Immunology Safety Division to lie on their reports, to manipulate data, to massage data, to bury the links between autism and Thimerosal and vaccines. So, and he has turned tens of thousands of pages of documents over to Congress, and he has asked to be subpoenaed by Congress. So we are waiting for, we're hoping that Congressman Jason Chaffetz will subpoena him, or one of the other heads of the appropriate committees, oversight committees for Congress will subpoena him, and I think Congress has these documents now, and Stuart Burns, who is the chief of staff to the congressman who actually received these documents from Dr. Posey, has said that that these documents, when they're released, are not just a smoking gun; they are a wildfire that will burn CDC to its foundations because of the corruption of that agency.
Yeah.
So that's the problem, is that we have an agency, and that is in charge of mandating these essentially mandating these vaccines, but we can't really trust that agency. And the secondary problem is this, that all of the checks and balances that normally would occur in a democratic society that are designed to protect our children have been neutralized. The politicians have been neutralized. Big Pharma, a reporter asked me before I came in here today, and said, Big Pharma's like the military-industrial complex, aren't they? We've all been fearing. Well, Big Pharma is bigger than the military-industrial. Big Pharma is $1 trillion industry. It's one of the biggest industries on the planet. Big Pharma spends more on lobbying than any other industry. And, and it spends equal to, in political contributions to any of the largest industries. But on lobbying, it's spent $2.6 billion over the last couple of years, which is double what oil and gas spends, which is the second biggest, and it's 5 times what defense and aerospace spends. So you imagine the control that gives it of Congress. So they've been able to neutralize and turn our politicians into their indentured servants on Capitol Hill. And it's neutralized the regulatory agency, which has now become just the CDC is a sock puppet for the vaccine industry, and instead of serving the interests of public health, the mission of public health, it's serving the mercantile interest of that industry. So you have the politicians and the regulatory agency that are gone. You have the lawyers, which would be the next safeguard, the bulwark. If the vaccine industry did something wrong, they'd sue them, and they'd do discovery, and they'd find the documents, and they'd force them into compliance. But the vaccine industry is so powerful on Capitol Hill that they have been able to get laws passed that make it illegal to sue a vaccine maker for injuries that they caused to somebody who received that vaccine. There's no other industry in the country that has that. In fact, to me, it's clearly against the Constitution. We have the 7th Amendment that says that if you taxpayer money, and there's no discovery, and the attorneys are paid a pittance. So you don't get these big, muscular class action attorneys that are going after these people and making and keeping them honest. So okay, we've got the politicians neutralized, the regulatory agency neutralized, the attorneys neutralized, and then what's left? The press. The pharmaceutical industry is by far the largest advertiser to the American press. They give upwards of $5.4 billion a year in advertising, most of it to TV, and most of that goes to the news. I was with the head of one of the news divisions talking about this issue the other day, and isn't this for reaction? It's great, let's put this on. And I said, you may want to look at your advertising budget first. And he went, oh, yeah. And he said, in some years, non-election years, we get as much, sometimes, as 70% of our ad revenues coming from pharmaceutical companies. And all you have to do is look at the news every night and see that the news departments have just become a vehicle for selling, pharmaceutical products. So they're not going to, they will not, there's no national news show that would allow me on to have this conversation with the American people. And I've asked them all, and I said, bring on Paul Offit, let him debate me. Bring on somebody from CDC. Bring on anybody, just let's have a discussion, let's have a debate. There is no national news show that will allow that to happen. And there is no newspaper, because they're buying the newspapers as well. There's no newspaper that will publish my editorials on this issue. They'll publish, if I write about something else, I can get it published almost anywhere. But they won't publish if I use the V word. So the American people are not hearing this debate. And this is one of the few, this is actually the first time I've had anything like a public discussion or debate with anybody in a public forum. This simply is not allowed to happen. It's an extraordinary thing. It's a Kafka-esque cocoon. And if you look at the reporters who have tried to cover this, and Columbia Journal Review of Journalism Dan Schulman did a wonderful article in 2005 about what happens to reporters who try to cover this issue, that they lose their jobs. There's a few out there, Dan Olmsted from UPI, gone. Cheryl Atkinson from CBS, gone. Allison Camaretto, hanging by a thread from Fox News, and then there's a woman down at the Charlotte Observer who's been willing to write something about this issue very tentatively, but otherwise nobody will cover this issue. And I don't just mean, the major newspapers, and I've tried every one of them, but also, alternative press, like I said, Salon, Slate, Mother Jones, HuffPost, none of them will cover this issue. None of them will allow a real debate on the science. And you have journalists in this country who are not reading the science. They are getting their talking points from CDC and the vaccine industry, and they repeat the same thing over and over and over again. There is no connection. The science is in. All of the science that made that connection has been debunked and discredited. You're crazy. You're a crankcase. And I'd say, just read the science. Read the science. When I published this book, when Mark Hyman and I, and Martha Herbert, who's at Harvard, and Mark Hyman is 8 times New York Times bestseller, when we published this book, we decided at the last minute to take the whole section on autism out. Because we knew if we had a section on all the science showing that Thimerosal caused autism. But we took it out of the book, that whole chapter, because we knew if we put it in that we would be absolutely censored and nobody would let us on any TV show. As it is, the only show that we got on was Dr. Oz, and it was very, very controlled. Nobody else would let us on. And I brought for Dr. Hendren today essentially a summary of that chapter, which is 37 studies that show that Thimerosal is causing, or indicate that Thimerosal is causing autism. So, and I'm going to give this to you, and anybody who asks me, anybody in the press, if you're a member of the national press, you can be the first reporter in this country to actually read science on this issue.
Great.
And these are major publications. One of these, and each one of them is summarized here to make it easy for you. One of these is a study by Kronberg. It's a CDC study in 2013, published in JAMA, one of the most prestigious medical publications in the country, that show that when the Danish government, and this is what really happened in Denmark, as opposed to the Madsen study, which was the fake what happened. This is what really happened, which shows that when Thimerosal was removed from vaccines in 1993, there was a 33% drop in autism. So, and they were giving tiny amounts of, and they have a very, very small autism rate compared to ours, and they were giving tiny amounts of mercury in their vaccines, much smaller than what we give to our kids. Where we give the big, biggest vaccine mandates in the country, in the world, and the most mercury at that time. So anyway, I want to give that to Dr. Hendren, and there's one last thing that I'll say, is this, that one of the things that CDC likes to say, and this is so crazy and so insane, and it's a form of it's like global warming denial, but worse, it's Holocaust denial. What they like to say, and they don't really come out and say it because there's no science to back it. What they say is, there really is no autism epidemic. It's just that we now notice it more. And this is what they actually say. They don't have any science to back that up. In fact, there's a lot of science, and it's in my book. I have a whole chapter that I had to put in here because CDC is saying this. So I had to show, and in fact, there's a great study in California by Mark Blaxell that shows it is a real epidemic. CDC will never use the word epidemic when they talk about autism. They won't even use the word crisis. They have a policy of not using those terms. They instead will say, it's a serious healthcare concern. They will use epidemic and crisis talking about a measles epidemic that made 170 people sick and killed no one, and that was pretty typical of every measles epidemic that we have every year. But during the same 4-month period when that measles epidemic was affecting California, there were 10,000 people diagnosed with autism. And what does autism do? You know, what does it do to these people? The idea that we made that, you know, I grew up working with intellectually disabled people. My aunt started Special Olympics. My family, this was the central focus of my family for generations. And I was there when Special Olympics was started. We were working in Camp Shriver from when I was a little boy. During high school, I spent hundreds of hours at Wasatch Home for the Retarded. And I am familiar with the range of intellectual disabilities. We never saw autism when we were growing up. And an autistic kid would have been one of the, you know, the real autism, those kids couldn't be in Special Olympics. You couldn't put them in Special Olympics. We didn't have that category. Most Americans never heard of autism until 1988 when Rain Man came out. And people were like, wow. But that was kind of a, you know, Rain Man was kind of like a jolly kind of autism.
Yeah.
The autism that these women today are experiencing is a nightmare beyond any kind of comprehension. And these people are invisible. Yeah. Because these are, you know, if autism is just if it's just a diagnosis issue, if it's just because we're better at diagnosing it, then where are all the adult 30-year-old autistics? Right? Where's that population of 30-year-olds who are in diapers and football helmets and nonverbal? They don't exist. It's this generation, the generation that was vaccinated after 1989. That's when they changed the vaccine schedule, and that's when all these neurological disorders began. ADD, ADHD, hyperactivity, speech delay, language delay, developmental delays, misery disorder, ADD, tics, ASD, and autism. All of them have it. EPA has said that's the gateway year, and that's the year the CDC changed the vaccine schedule. Why did they change it? Because 3 years before, in 1986, Congress gave the vaccine companies immunity. So all of a sudden it became a profit margin, and in 1989 they changed it and started adding all these vaccines, and that's when all these problems began. So, and you know, saying that it doesn't exist, and they can say it doesn't exist because people don't see, you don't see these children. You don't see their parents. This destroys families. You know, there's a 75% divorce rate in the parents of autistic kids. These are kids, they're in football helmets, they're in diapers, they're going to be that way until they're 75 years old. Their parents can't get a babysitter. They can't go out at night. They're bankrupt, first of all. They're bankrupt. All of their psychic and emotional energy is drained by taking care of this child. They are totally traumatized. And they are disappeared from the political landscapes because they've got nothing left. They don't have anything that they can give. And all they're trying to do is take care of this child who has to be sat on, who's, screaming and biting and injuring people, attacking their own parents, having seizures and fits. And this didn't exist. It would be like missing a train wreck. And then, I'll tell you something else. I got into this involuntarily because women were coming to me after I spoke about mercury from power plants. And they were this extraordinary breed of woman. They were eloquent and articulate. They were pharmacists and psychiatrists and doctors and attorneys. And they knew what happened to their kid. They all had the exact same story. My child was 2 years old. He exceeded all the milestones. He was in speech, in coordination, in sports, in social interactions. He could look you in the eye. He could point his finger. We took him in. We got that shot. We got a series of shots in one day along with the MMR shot. And that evening, he developed 103 fever. He went into seizures. 2 months later, his brain disappeared. There are 1 million of these children. I was in Utah last night, which has the highest vaccination rate in the country and the highest autism rate. 1 out of every 39 kids is autistic. Okay, and it all started in 1989. I was in New Jersey, which is the second highest, and the second highest vaccination rate in the country. Same thing. And, and these, we are ignoring this, and we are burying it, and it's in front of all of us, and the press is guilty. They are complicit in this Holocaust. And my father always wondered about, one of the things that fascinated him is how do normally decent, good, civilized human beings become complicit in a Holocaust. And and he looked back over time and saw historically how they do it. And usually it involves an authority figure that is getting undeserved reverence. And the second thing it involves is a willingness to put your head down and ignore the facts. And these people have to pretend that there's no autism epidemic. What do you have to do to delude yourself? To be a total Holocaust denier when the Holocaust is happening right now in front of all of us. And these women are doubly traumatized because they're traumatized by taking care of this child, and then they're traumatized by being berated and derided and as hysterics and crazy and crackpots and by the government and by the press. And it is the most misogynistic movement that I have ever seen. And what you have to think, when people who use the term anti-vaxxers, what you have to think, when you use that term anti-vaxxer, you think of a woman, of parents with an intellectually disabled child.
Thank you.
Because the people who are vaccine hesitant, almost all the ones I've met, are people with a vaccine-injured child. And they don't want to do the same thing to their other children because they think they may share the same genetic vulnerability. And so they're hesitant. They're not anti-vaccine, they're hesitant. They want to go slow, they don't trust the CDC. Anyway, I'm going to shut up and
welcome to the Commonwealth Club. I appreciate that you're here, and point out to the audience that are listening that this is the Commonwealth Club, and we're fortunate to have Robert F. Kennedy Jr. here talking to us about vaccines. And that would lead into my first question. Now, there's a lot of interest in this room. Look at all of these questions, and I haven't even gotten them all. So I've been trying to read through them and think about themes that seem to come through, and try to keep the questions going in that direction. But one theme that I'd start with is, you wrote an excellent book about Thimerosal, saying mercury is toxic to nerves, to a growing nervous system, and you can make that case. The debate seems to be, what's the level that's too toxic? And you say, there's no level that's okay. Why should we put mercury in vaccines? Why should, when there are alternatives? So that, from a medical perspective, or from even my more open-minded colleagues' perspective, would say, good point. But then you take it to vaccines, then all vaccines, and then to the Holocaust, and to autism, and those get to be bigger and bigger leaps. Why not just fight the fight of mercury? Why not just get mercury out of vaccines and not take on the whole large industry?
Well, that's a really good point, Dr. Hendren, and I would like to say that any of you who need to convince somebody that this issue is real and that the whole issue of Thimerosal and the connection with autism and the corruption at CDC, there is an extraordinary movie out that is the result of 10 years of really brilliant research that summarizes everything that I just talked about and much more. And it's a new movie called Trace Amounts, that when people, no matter how hostile they are, they go in there, they come out transformed. And they come out and say, we have been hoodwinked, we have been lied to, and this is a horror. So I want to tell people you should get a hold of Trace Amounts. I think you can get it now on Amazon, and there's ways that the producers will allow you to, if you notify them on the website, Trace Amounts website, they will, and you can get 20 people to come watch it. They'll get you a free film and they'll rent a theater for you. And we want to get this out on the social media, so please do that. The answer to your question is that the strategy, that is exactly the strategy that we employed when we wrote this book. We decided not to get into the autism issue because it was so radioactive, and we said we're just going to focus on getting the Thimerosal out of the vaccines. The Thimerosal is causing, all of these other injuries that it causes, the ADD, the ADHD, the tics, which is a grave neurological event, Tourette's syndrome, etc. That's enough. We don't need anything more. Mercury, everybody knows mercury is toxic to neural tissue. Here it is. Here's the evidence. Here's the science. There's no contesting it. Let's get it out. So we wrote this book. We gathered all the science, hundreds of scientific. We removed all the autism studies. Then we gave it to CDC and FDA and HHS and IOM for a year, and we didn't publish because we didn't want people to lose faith in the agency. We didn't want to go to press and have to take this to the public. We wanted them to quietly take the Thimerosal out, and we presumed they would do that once they saw the scientific proof that it was completely devastating these children. And they don't need it. We know they don't need it because they took it out of most of the pediatric vaccines in 2003. And in fact, we have letters that are in this book from Merck and Aventis Pasteur telling CDC we can produce all of the flu vaccines without any Thimerosal in them, and CDC saying to them, no, we want you to leave it in. So we knew they could take it out. What?
Because of culpability?
Why
do you think
the reason that when we asked CDC about that, what they said is, well, we want to have a whole lot of little vaccine companies, a diversity of vaccine producers in case there's a bio attack or something in our country. And just because two of the big ones said that they could make everything Thimerosal free, we don't know that all the little ones could, and it might hurt them economically if we just said, okay, we're going to buy all the vaccines from two companies. So that was their rationale, which, is not crazy,
You want to keep mercury producing companies?
Yeah, it's on page 24 and 25 of this book. It's Merck and SmithKline Beecham were the two companies that wrote and this is July 21st, 19. My eyes suddenly at 61 have started. Just really tiny. But anyway, I don't know. Can you look at that?
Looks like 1990.
Yeah, 1990. So they said at that time they could produce more. So we know that they can take it out. And by the way, you don't need the mercury if you're having single-dose vials. The only ones you need it for is the multi-dose. So if you just make everybody get the single dose, which costs pennies more, why not do that and avoid? We're spending $400 billion a year right now taking care of treating autism in this country in our healthcare system, and the first generation of these kids is just leaving high school and landing in our social system, and it's going to bankrupt Obamacare. It's going to bankrupt our social system, our whole social structure. So if you're paying 20 cents more per vaccine, who cares? It's piddling compared to the cost of taking care of these kids with
What
their injuries.
advice would you have for a pregnant mom or a pregnant grandson or granddaughter or a daughter about their immunization schedule? If you're...
The one thing, they are gradually removing the Thimerosal from the flu vaccines, which is where you're getting the big doses, because they took it out of most of the pediatric vaccines in 2003. But the same year they took it out, CDC added virtually the same amounts to the flu vaccine, which they then, added to the schedule, so that, and they, for the first time, started giving Thimerosal to pregnant women. We don't know what that generation is going to look like, because the CDC statistics for autism in children, which is now 1 in 68, that is for kids who were born in 2002. When they were still getting the pediatric vaccine, but it was the first year that they started giving flu vaccines to pregnant women, and they weren't giving that many. And then, but since then, we've been giving them, huge amounts. The first few years, they were making 185 million vaccines, and only 5 million of them were Thimerosal free. I went to my local healthcare group, which was Mount Kisco Medical Group in New York, and I said, I want Thimerosal free for all my kids. And they said, we'll see if we can get them. And they ended up getting for the entire health group, for like 15,000 people. But they probably got, a huge amount of what was available in the country at that time, just because they had one person bugging them. Nowadays, it's easier to get them. I think that the Thimerosal flu shots this year, they made something like 69 million out of that, out of what I think is around 190 million, and don't hold me to that, but I think that is. So it's like a half or a third of them are loaded with Thimerosal. The other problem is that it's still in trace amounts in many of the pediatric vaccines, and that sounds like it's okay, trace amounts. But what it means legally is it's up to 1 microgram per shot. Down from the normal kid shots had 12 to 24 micrograms. So now it's 1 microgram, it's about 10% of what it used to be. But what they did was they added aluminum. And when mercury combines with aluminum, it had, in fact, Thimerosal on its insert says, do not combine with aluminum. Okay, and or you may have it may provoke violent reactions. And in this movie, Trace Amounts, there's an extraordinary scene where they pour a little bit of aluminum, a little bit of mercury on an aluminum I-beam, and the whole thing just disintegrates. And what Dr. Boyd Haley did a series of studies that showed if you put Thimerosal onto a brain tissue, neural tissue, that it kills about 10% of the cells. If you put aluminum onto that brain tissue, it kills about 3% of the cells. If you put aluminum and mercury, it kills 100% of the cells. So what they did when they took the mercury out is they put a lot of aluminum in. And there's never been any testing as to what that does to a human brain, so we don't really know. And that's what scares me is not, is that we don't know. We don't know. Nobody knows. And so I think you really have to ask a lot of questions of your pediatrician.
So you would advise parents or others thinking about vaccinations to find a pediatrician they can work with and talk to about an immunization
Exactly,
schedule?
somebody who is willing to talk about it, and, you know, at very least, you should be demanding a thimerosal-free vaccine. Do not, under any condition, and don't let your parents take them, because a lot of the adult vaccines have them, and we're now seeing this huge increase in autism that also is going to threaten to bankrupt our, I mean, in Alzheimer's, that is also threatening to bankrupt our healthcare system, and we're seeing the dramatic increases, which again began in 1989 when they changed the vaccine schedule. So, and there's a lot of studies out there that connect mercury and aluminum to exposures to increase risk of Alzheimer's. So those are, you know, you should demand always, you know, almost all the vaccines you can get thimerosal-free product. So you should demand that.
So you're familiar, I know, with Senate Bill 277. You've been given testimony about that here in our state. Do you have an opinion that you want to share about?
You know,
It's a thorny issue.
Yeah, it's a thorny issue, and what I would say is that it's a, you know, first of all, there's a very, very small number of people who are not children not getting vaccinated. If you look at the statistics in California, and we did this in Oregon and several other states, it's the statistics don't give you a clear picture of how many people are actually avoiding vaccines. For example, in this state, the state health department counts you as avoiding a vaccine if you don't take any one of those 69 doses. So, and in some cases, if you're late, you are counted as being unvaccinated. So when you look at the cohorts who are actually unvaccinated, they're very, very small. People who have no vaccinations, it's much less than 2%, we think. So I wouldn't say that this is a crisis. You know, I'm not a public health expert, but I would say that just from common sense, it doesn't appear to be a huge crisis. And the problem I have with this is, you know, we've gotten rid of all of the checks and balances that protect the parent, that protect the child from essentially a rapacious industry. So, and I don't want to say that lightly, a rapacious industry, but I'll say this: Merck, which makes most of the vaccines in this country, right now also is under investigation by the Justice Department for lying about the effectiveness of the MMR vaccine. So in order to get the monopoly that they have on MMR, they have to show that it's 95% effective. And two whistleblowers from inside of Merck have now come forward to say that they were ordered by Merck to create sham studies to fraudulently present that vaccine as efficacious. I think the mumps portion of the vaccine is efficacious when it is and when it's not anywhere near efficacious. So this is a rapacious industry. What's protecting our children from it? The free market would, because if you could choose what to buy and what not to buy, you'd buy the safe stuff and the efficacious stuff. But there's no free market. You're ordered to buy it. The politicians are not going to protect you because they're bought off. The CDC is not going to protect you because it's bought off. The lawyers are gone from the equation. The press is gone. So the only thing that is standing between that child and Merck is the parent. And if you get rid of all of the philosophical, you can't get the religious exemption. If you, let's say you say, I don't want to give my kid the hepatitis B vaccine, because hepatitis B, where you're giving it to the kid the day they're born, it's a disease that you really can't get except through sexual transmission. I want to delay that. So, so maybe use 12. But if you make that decision, what can you say? You can't say you have a religious exemption. The only way you qualify for that religious exemption is if you refuse all vaccines. So, okay, so then you get rid of the philosophical exemption, which means I'm going to pick some and not pick the others, and pick the ones I believe are important and pick the ones that I'm not. So that's what you can do now, but you get rid of that. So now you're only left with the medical exemption, and let's say, okay, put yourself in the shoes of a parent who saw their kid get vaccinated and get autism, and get the fever and get autism, the standard, procedures. For many, many people, right? Thousands of people have that same story. So, and you believe, whether anybody else believes or not, you believe that your child got brain injured, some kind of brain injury from the vaccine, and it's autism. And you believe it's autism that is from the vaccine. So then you go to your pediatrician and you say, I don't want to give him any other shots because I think he has a sensitivity because he got autism from the vaccine. And I don't want to give it to his little brothers. The pediatrician has an obligation now to say to you, no, CDC says that's impossible. So you're not entitled to the medical exception. Because what you think happened was just a coincidence. It didn't really happen. So what do you do if you're a parent? Now, after World War II, we developed a treaty in Nuremberg because of what was happening in Germany during the war, where they were doing involuntary medical procedures on people. And we all agreed in the Helsinki agreements, and all the, most of the nations, all the civilized nations in the world signed it, that involuntary medical procedure, that you needed informed consent for any medical procedure. Well, vaccine is a medical procedure, and it is what the Supreme Court called it unavoidably unsafe. Okay, so it is an unavoidably unsafe medical procedure. Are we really going to force people to engage in an unavoidably unsafe medical procedure without their consent? To me, the best way to assure maximum vaccine compliance is not to put our boots onto the necks of these parents who have an intellectually disabled kid and believe that they got that way because of the vaccine injuries. We can't do, the better way to do that is to restore the safety of the vaccines and to restore the integrity and credibility of the regulatory system.
Because we're beginning to wind it around, I consulted a school for children with, and adolescents with severe autism. And when the Disneyland thing came up, there was concern, what if measles were to break out at the school? A third of the kids are not vaccinated at that school. Parents have chosen, for whatever reason, to not vaccinate their kids. But if measles were to break out in the school, all those kids that were not vaccinated would need to stay home to see through the full incubation time. It was a surprise to think that these are kids that already have autism. Many of them are adolescents. Why wouldn't you vaccinate a child, with standard things like the MMR or a single valent MMR? Do you have any thoughts?
That's really a medical question that I'm not, and I don't know. I don't really understand antigen development and what happens to immunocompromised people who are vaccinated, whether it is medically advisable to, for that reason. So I think there are a lot of questions, and I am not competent to answer any of them.
That was too easy then, I'll give you a hard. What do you think about Andy Wakefield?
Well, what I think about Andy Wakefield is that I really don't know much about Andy Wakefield. Andy Wakefield has become the villain of the vaccine industry. He's become this kind of bugaboo. And I've actually looked at his paper, and his paper is really kind of innocuous. The paper that was withdrawn from the Lancet, he
It's a little comment.
right. He made a comment that he apparently found in the gut of some autistic children the ribovirin, right? Attenuated that it suggested, at least suggested, and that's all he said. Right, that this may be, that there may be a relationship and it ought to be investigated. So it was rather innocuous, and in fact, Wake Forest just did a study which duplicated Andy Wakefield's study. So, and they're under a lot of pressure right now. My understanding is not to publish that study, but I think he is, he was, people should go look up a phenomenon called the Semmelweis reflex. The Semmelweis reflex, and it is a phenomenon that about what the medical community does when it's challenged about the safety of one of its standard practices, and it comes to us from actually Henrik Ibsen wrote a book about, a play about, a very famous play called Enemy of the People, and he wrote it because he wrote it about Ignaz Semmelweis, who discovered that at the time that he lived and ran the big hospital in Austria, 30% of the women who came in for childbirth were dying of puerperal fever. And the doctors who were treating those women, delivering the babies, were also the women who died. They were doing the autopsies on them and then not washing their hands. And he thought maybe there's a particle of some kind that is being transferred from the dead women and infecting somehow these healthy women, killing them, and he had to really start washing their hands. It was the first time in history doctors were required to wash their hands. And the medical community became so enraged that on the suggestion that a practice of theirs was actually injuring the patients, that they revolted, they took away his license, they locked him in a mental institution, he died. And then 40 years later, Louis Pasteur came along and said, yeah, they're germs. He was vindicated, but 40 years after his death, and Ibsen wrote a play about it, but you should look up the Semmelweis reflex if you want to understand the reaction of the medical community to what Andy Wakefield did.
Well, unfortunately, we've reached the point in our program today where we have time for only one more question. Dr. Hendren, if you could ask Mr. Kennedy the toughest question from some of your colleagues at UCSF, and Mr. Kennedy, you might even have that question already that people have asked you, but the really tough questions that are not being discussed. Dr. Hendren, is there one of those that we could close with today?
I don't know how hard it is, but you haven't talked about it. We have an autism clinic at UCSF, and another child psychiatrist that I do the clinic with, I told him that I was coming here to do that. And he said, oh, there's nothing to that Thimerosal stuff. He said, Thimerosal is ethyl mercury, and the one we're worried about is methyl mercury. And so they made a whole big to-do about nothing.
Well, that's interesting because that was kind of an idea that was promoted by Eli Lilly very, very early on with no scientific basis for it. And then what they found, there was a study by a man named Pichero in 2002, I believe, or 2004, which lent some credence to that hypothesis. Because what they said, they tested children who had been eating fish, which is methyl mercury. They tested their blood, and then they tested it, and they found that the methyl mercury stayed in their blood for 54 days. They found, but when they were injected with Thimerosal, the ethyl mercury stayed in their blood for only a week, and it was gone. The half-life in the blood was very quick. So Pichero, his study kind of validated or fortified this old myth that Eli Lilly had made, which was the producer of Thimerosal. But a lot of people immediately began criticizing Pichero, and they said, well, what actually happened to it? It didn't end up in the feces, it didn't end up in the urine, and it's not in the hair. So where is it? And what they realized was that it crosses the blood-brain barrier much easier
than ethyl mercury, and then it metabolizes into organic mercury, which is the toxic kind that becomes locked in brain tissue. And what subsequent studies by Burbacher, really extensive studies, and a recent Italian study showed that ethyl mercury is actually 50 times more toxic to neural tissue than methyl mercury. So the ethyl mercury in vaccines, according to the science, not the mythology, and the talking points, but according to the science, the ethyl mercury is far, far, far more toxic to brain tissue than the methyl mercury in fish.
Well, thank you both. Our program today has been Thimerosal, the science behind Thimerosal. And our moderator today, Dr. Robert Hendren from UCSF Benioff Hospital. Our speaker today, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And with this, I'd like to thank you all for being here at the Commonwealth Club today in person. I'd like to thank all of our audience members listening at home. And with this, I'll close this program by the Commonwealth Club of California, celebrating over 100 years of enlightened discussion. Book